Yes.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, we'll get started in just a minute.
There's, yeah, but there's an echo.
Okay, well, my computer says 11:45, so let's get started. Hello, everybody, here in Wiesbaden and also online. As you said, my name's Brian Osborne. I'm the current Post President for the Rhine Main Post. Great to have people to join us here on this 21st of November, our pre-Thanksgiving presentation. We slipped it forward just to make sure that our US colleagues could enjoy that day. We are in a slightly different venue today. This is the first time we've been here. We're at the USO admin office on Heidelberg Kaserne, and unfortunately, there's no one from the USO here because of various other things going on. But I want to say a big thank you to USO for making their conference room available to us. We had to find an alternative. As our original plan venue let us down that way. But thanks to the folk here, we're able to do this. And I'm going to shout out for the USO, great organization, does great work. And hopefully they'll let us come back to use this again in the future. So first of all, some announcements, fairly straightforward. Everyone's used to being online. Switch off microphone, switch off your camera, keep your microphone muted until question and answers. We'll do that at the end of the presentations. We are recording this. It will probably, the meeting will be presented on our website and YouTube channel. And I think we've still got the wrong website address. To find our post, go to same.org. And then follow the links to Posts International. You'll find the Rhine Main Post, and you'll find our current website. That's my mistake. I failed to upstate that slide. These are the 2024 post officers. If you have any questions of any of these subjects, please reach out to the responsible officer. We will be next slide, please. Okay, so anybody that's interested in getting involved in our post, please contact me or go to our go to the website and contact any of our board members. Our board members serve 12 months starting in January, so we will be holding elections for the next board next year. We will invest those in our January meeting. Especially interested anyone who'd like to support us on our outreach program. Okay, next slide, please. So this is our current program to the end of the year and for next for January. Some people may be missing the December, the traditional Christmas event. We decided to not hold an event this year. Largely because actually didn't seem to be a great deal of support for it in the community. There are so many other things going on. Christmas, everyone's trying to get their jobs, get their work done. So if we're taking a miss, we will look next year to try and have a bit of an extravaganza. Maybe holding it every 2 years will get a bit more interest from folk. Membership, Chris.
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. So we have a post that has quite a good number of members.
We have 195 active members of the recorded to date, and we have an increase in our new members in 2024. We have actually 28 that joined, so this is a good increase overall. And we have still a few members that are in the grace period, meaning that they have not renewed their membership through themselves or through their companies, but they're still in the system as members, but soon this grace period will expire. So I recommend people, if you're interested, to continue to renew your membership as soon as possible. And so we're looking for, engagement, your engagement in 2025 and beyond. Go to the next slide that shows the companies that support this post, and we have 33 standing members in 2024, and we have 5 new additions this year, which is a big increase, I would say, year over year. In the next slide, you can see who all these companies are, and we thank you very much for your continued support to the post. Over.
Okay, thanks, Grace. And just to reiterate that, big shout out to our sustaining members, without whom it would be very difficult to maintain the post as it is. This slide, young professionals, is Nick on the call? No, okay. So a few things just that people should be aware of. SAME has a leader development program, which is open to members of the society. It was established in 2019, very successful program. Several of the post officers have been through that program. There is current application period is open. Deadline to apply is the 1st of December. There's the link if you want to apply. There's also some on this slide, a few other resources, especially government employees, regarding professional qualifications and professional development that you can access. Nick Irwin is our VP for young professionals and leadership. So if you have any questions, reach out to him. Be happy to hear from you. Next slide, please. Ken Staley, you on the call?
Yes, I am. So good morning, everyone. On this slide, there are a list of STEM and scholarship related activities for early 2025. First, each year, our post awards 1 or more scholarships to high school senior students that will be attending an accredited college or university. Applications are expected to go out in December, and the deadline for that is typically the end of March. Second, similar to last year, we're planning a dual or multi-international virtual classroom event. Last year, it was between Wiesbaden High. It included Wiesbaden High School and maybe more than 100 STEM students in Ukraine. This year, we're looking at coordinating with the Kaiserslautern Post and our newly established Poland field office, field chapter. So look out for that in probably the spring of 2025. And lastly, SAME hosts student camps in the US each year. Applications for that are expected to go out in December or January. The current deadline for that will be March 12th. More information to follow. Next slide. Related to a number of our STEM activities, we have the annual golf outing. This is a fundraiser for student scholarships and STEM activities at our post. That is, like other years, anticipated to be in May or June, and at Rheinblick Golf Course in Wiesbaden, same as usual. We do have a theme each year. You can see a few of them above. The theme will be determined and the date will be confirmed probably in about January 2025. And that's all. Oh, and at this event, we do typically provide the scholarship winners and their families with their award. Over.
Okay, thanks, Ken. Next slide, please. So here you have the updated, the correct website address, We try and maintain contact with our members or non-members through various means. So watch out for the newsflash, regular emails, and our previous events are recorded. Most of them are recorded. You'll find videos on the YouTube on our website there, on our RheinMain Main Post site. We do even record the golf tournament. So there's usually a video from the golf tournament as well, which is a lot of fun. Right. So there's one thing I did miss out. When I was talking about the programs, I skipped over our big event in January. We've had lots of inquiries as to getting to that event and signing up for it. We're in the process of finalizing the arrangements with the venue. We will be going to the same venue as last year. I now have to say formerly known as Little Italy, as they're now under new management. So we're working with them. Hopefully next week we'll have our contracts in place. And we're also looking to see if we can accommodate a few more people. It's usually been oversubscribed the last couple of years. Great event. Good program briefing. Okay, now before we move into the main presentation, I'd like to present to Adrian Group a coin. So Adrian is, for those of you who recall or at the meeting, presented in October. The ABG 1975 construction. That was an online meeting, so we didn't have the chance to meet in person. So Adrian, thank you very much.
Thank you
for
for
your
the
work. Thank you
opportunity.
for supporting the post,
Thank you.
and we look forward to coming back some more.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Adrian. So now I'd like to introduce our two presenters today. So we have Mick Bilney, who is a global senior principal at the Asset Management Resilience at Stantec Government Services, based in Colorado. Mick has over 30 years experience. I think we're probably doing 30 presentations for us. So Mick has been a regular feature last year's. Of working with international organizations on enterprise risk analysis, management systems, and climate risk and resilience. And yes, okay. He has worked on and managed projects in over 20 countries on 6 continents. Mixed clients include the US Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, Department of State, NASA, NOAA, Department of Energy, and the Australian Defence Agency. If I stumbled over climate risk, I think whatever the cause of climate change, I think most people agree that the climate is changing, and it's not just the weather. Also here is Mr. Chris Haverkamp, recently retired US Army Major, with 20 years time in service, culminating in 6 years of service with USRA AF Anti-Terrorism Section as a security engineer. So with that, what I'll do, I'll hand it over to Nick and Chris. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good.
Something is loading.
What you can't see is I'm taking direction from the folks who really know what they're doing here in terms of the technology. So they're helping us out greatly.
This doesn't sync, but the presentation is in the meeting.
Okay, so just a technical situation right now is that you online can see the presentation and the people in the meeting can't. We need to connect next computer, which it might not reach. Maybe you can just can you connect to Sandy's computer? She'll be showing up.
Hey, Brian, we can see the slides. It's just in PowerPoint mode where we, see all of them on the left as opposed to presentation mode. But there you go.
Okay, stand by while we also make sure the people that are here can see the slides as well before we get going. There we go.
There.
Some juggling of laptops.
So the key point, what we're going to be talking about today is how Chris and I adapted some a couple of UFC documents 4020 and 4010, contents of those documents to support a methodology that can increase climate hazard resilience at military installations and infrastructure, as well as mission critical assets. And the point of this is that design criteria for mission critical assets is really key. And what we have done is taken a process that exists and added some additional components to it to help us get to this point. I'm going to, I've got several videos embedded in the presentation, and we'll start with this one to give you an idea of what it's like during one of these severe weather events that is related to the changing climate. Oops, sorry. Now, as the video demonstrated or indicated, that was at Tyndall Air Force Base when Hurricane Michael came through. And you'll see several videos that are based on what happened during that time period. Our agenda, in terms of what we'll be talking about, we'll show some key terms and definitions that apply to severe weather and climate hazards. And other natural hazards, as well as show you some of those. And we'll also show some of the documents that we adapted from particularly 020 to help identify what these particular hazards, what the effects are on climate, using the UFC process from the documents to help us identify the various climate severe weather risks at military installations. I'd like to start with a true story. This is one from my personal experience. I live in Arvada, Colorado, that is just south of Broomfield, Colorado. Back in December of 21, there was an incident in Colorado. My wife and I were actually on our way to lunch when we came up over a rise on one of the highways, and I noticed the cloud that you can see in the picture on the left, and mentioned to my wife that, boy, the fog was really strong that morning, and perhaps we were going to get some snow. We went to lunch, and when we came out, the fog had turned into a cloud that was very clearly a result of a fire that had started on the prairie grass and had moved onto the housing units in Broomfield. And it wasn't until we got home that we realized what the severity of this fire was becoming to be. It was fueled by 55-mile plus winds, gusting up to 70 or 80 miles an hour. And this created a blowtorch effect in the neighborhoods where these houses were. The fire quickly grew to over 120 acres, and it had no containment. 35,000 people were evacuated that day as we watched on this unfold on TV. Some of them had less than 30 seconds to be able to leave their homes. And it was only the bravery of the first responders that saved the lives that were saved that day. Only, unfortunately, 2 people died, but fortunately, there weren't more than that. And as it indicates, over 1,000 pets perished as well during the fire. Ultimately, 6,200 acres were burned, and over 1,000 homes and other buildings were destroyed. As you can see, it came to over $2 billion in damages. And then it snowed the next day, and that was what ultimately put out the fire. From this fire, this wildfire, which was caused by drought and the severe dry weather we'd had in November and December in the area, there were some lessons learned about building design, which is really what we're trying to get to today. And this is from a document, Site Design and Building Materials. And it was based on the 2009 International Wildland Urban Interface Code. And what was determined was that certain of the homes, the residences, were actually did not burn in the fire, didn't burn because of the design criteria that they had that helped keep the sparks from getting under the roofs, under the eaves, and thus continuing to burn the fire. Now, obviously, there's not a lot of wood homes and neighborhoods like this on military bases, but there are some. And the point being is that the design criteria of this construction of the houses was very important. When we looked at the documents that Chris will demonstrate later on in the presentation, what we tried to do was to bring indicators that have been used by us in the past at Stantec for other clients to prioritize climate hazard impacts. And there are a lot of location-specific asset data that we bring into play when we look at prioritization of the hazards. That includes where the facility is at, how proximate to various hazards they are, what sort of past events have occurred that had to do with severe weather and climate-related hazards, and so on. As you can see, the list, including the age and the condition of the assets, all come into play. And then looking at the exposures, the sensitivity, the adaptive capacity, and ultimately the vulnerability of the assets on the installations. And typical climate hazards and indicators that we see include severe wind. Those are hurricanes and tornadoes. For flooding, there's riverine, coastal, and rain related, what the scientists refer to as fluvial flooding. There's severe temperature, heat, and cold. Lightning, as is the experience here in Germany in certain installations. There's also drought, water scarcity, and of course, wildfire. And as the picture indicates, there's an example of flooding in Heidelberg that occurred earlier this year. One of the things that I try to stress with the folks that I work for and that we wanted to bring into play today is it's really important that when organizations take a look at doing these kinds of assessments and prioritizing severe weather and climate hazards, is that they have a shared understanding of the terms and definitions that are around them. And as you can see, these particular terms of hazard, resilience, and risk all come into play. And in fact, the definitions are right out of the DoD documents that are identified there. So everyone that follows Department of Defense directives is able to have access to these definitions and share them across the organization. So the point behind this, of course, this is about Tyndall. This is not in Germany. It's not in Europe. It's over on the southeast coast of the US. But the same kinds of storms, not hurricanes here in Europe, but other things, tornadoes here in Germany, wildfire here in Germany. These kinds of severe weather events, severe weather related and climate related events can occur. Now, the situation with Tyndall is that it's already happened. And they are rebuilding the base from the ground up. And that's what you just heard those gentlemen talk about. What Chris and I have done is to take a method that exists, as I mentioned briefly in the beginning, and seek to adapt it so that construction that is taking place now or that will take place in the future on military installations could be done such that it could be resisted. The kind of event that took Tyndall Air Force Base out of commission and destroyed it would be lessened or prevented elsewhere. That's what we're after today. Oops, sorry. There we go. Now, as organizations deal with these kinds of issues, and it's what I refer to as three key perspectives on resilience. There's the scientific, the engineering, and the organizational. And I'm not a scientist and I'm not an engineer. What I do is work with organizations, helping them determine what needs to be done in what sequence, and who needs to do it, and in what they need to do. And that's why I focus on that. But the organizations need to understand, they need to learn about certain things like mission critical infrastructure, asset design and construction needs, the interfaces and interdependencies and linkages between the data from science, the standards and design and construction methods from engineering, and so forth. And as I mentioned, how and when to take action to do things that achieve the objectives that they want to do. Every organization that chooses to do these things needs to think about that. This particular video, again, is from, well, this happens to be Mexico Beach. It wasn't on Tyndall, but it was the beach to the south of Tyndall. And what you'll hear here is what happens and the importance of going beyond the standards. So what these gentlemen did is they built a house that went above existing code, and it ultimately survived the wind, the severe wind that Michael brought to Mexico Beach and Tyndall. And part of the interesting thing, as Chris pointed out to me just the other day, is that the wind from the storms, both tornadoes and hurricanes, but of course in the case of Europe, tornadoes, is increasing. And the current standards are somewhat lower than what the current most severe winds are in these types of weather events. And so going above and beyond the code is likely one of the things that will be necessary in the future. Now, there's some key lessons learned from doing these exercises, and that is that existing and available data. There's a lot of available data that can be used. It's not all the time necessary to go out and collect more data, which is sometimes what organizations do. Also, there's existing public data that where you don't have to go out and buy it from proprietary sources. Looking at beyond the fence line where you're at to what conditions are at local, regional, country, and international exposures, and to prioritize characteristics of your existing infrastructure, your existing asset sensitivity and vulnerability. Look at conditions inside and outside the fence. And as I always try to point out, look at the supply chains for the materials and the equipment and that you use, that you're going to need when you're looking at accomplishing these standards, whether they're existing, whether you're going to meet all that's just what's necessary and sufficient, or if you're going to go above. Look at the supply chains for where those are coming from. And that goes for emergencies as well. So to talk about the UFCs themselves, particularly 020, I'm going to have Chris take over and pick up.
Thanks, Mick. So as many of you have seen, or as many of you have probably worked with over time, the design basis threat process that already exists was developed by the Corps over many, many years for anti-terrorism purposes. And what this process ultimately does is it allows users to identify hazards, identify risk, and ultimately determine a level of protection to kind of protect those assets from those various hazards. What Mick and I started to do was talk about how this could be modified and adapted for climate purposes. And I think that this process lends itself very, very well in that aspect. And I don't think right now that there is anything that exists like this to be able to, again, determine, if you look at it from that perspective, what your natural disaster hazards are, severe weather hazards, what that risk is, and then ultimately that level of protection that you would need to construct to or design to defeat those severe weather hazards. A little bit of technical difficulties, stand by. There we go.
Yeah.
So again, as I mentioned, there was a lot that has gone into the AT requirements for DoD facilities. It's been built over many, many years, and it is a requirement to be done from the AT side for existing buildings, basically new construction, 50% plant replacement, window replacement, things like that. And you can see all the various regulations that go behind that. That does not exist yet for climate purposes, and that would need to be developed. But having worked with these two particular documents, UFC 41001 and 42001, over the last many, many years, I think a lot of the bones are already there. It would not take much to really change those tables over and change kind of how the wording is in some of these documents to meet climate standards, or to meet or adapt this process for climate. As you can see, the current applicability, new construction, changes to existing buildings, occupancy, all of those things I think could remain. I think all of those triggers, when you're looking at it from a climate perspective, would also apply for this process. So that wouldn't be much of a change. Your exemptions, maybe we'd have to look at changing that a little bit. Mick and I were talking about, for example, one of the exceptions is for temporary and relocatable buildings. That probably would not be an exception when you're talking about severe weather and natural hazards happening, because the impact to those type of buildings would be much higher than some of your existing buildings. And so you would have to incorporate that when looking at those buildings. So UFC 42001 is used to determine the design basis threat and the level of protection. And then that will guide you into using what the minimum standards are that are outlined in UFC 41001. So the process will be modified in 42001, and then you would have to establish what those baseline standards for climate hardening would be in a new version of, say, 41001 or whatever, would have to be renamed in that aspect. Because those two documents obviously work hand in hand. This is the current process as it exists. I don't think that this would have to change hardly at all when you're going through this design basis threat process for the climate purposes. The names would change. For example, identify aggressor likelihoods would be identifying basically hazards, things like lightning, things like wind, rain events, that aspect. Tactics and severity and threat severity levels. Threat severity would probably change. Tactics, again, would be something different. But again, or deriving or arriving at that level of protection would be kind of what you're looking at doing. So this is kind of a mock-up that I developed to take a product that we already basically used in-house. It is a Excel spreadsheet that just kind of sort of automated a lot of what the 42001 processes are. Some of you are already familiar with this. But as you can see on the top, we've taken away those hazards that were forced entry, covert entry, things like that, and replaced it with damaging winds, wildfires, tropical event, 1,000-year flood, all these different kind of climactic hazards that we've talked about and looked at. And then your assets generally would remain the same. Again, assets are not necessarily that building when you're going through this process. It's the people, it's the equipment that's inside, because each one has kind of a different level of protection and a different threat and risk to those particular assets within that particular building. One of the things that I did change, and we can actually go to the next, I think it highlights it a little bit better. Okay, this is, I'll cover this one aspect in the next one, but this is, again, just looking at one of the tables as it exists now, the severity levels, the way it looks at the levels of protection, the asset categories, and the asset value rating. Again, that process all kind of would carry over for the climate aspect. And then all the key criteria, again, adapting the ratings, the likelihood ratings, the ranking prioritization, all the numbers that exist right now within the documents would have to be modified going forward, because a lot of work was done to kind of balance these numbers out when you go through the spreadsheets. And they would have to obviously be changed a little bit to meet these climactic hazards. Okay, so this is the next spreadsheet that basically is behind that initial cover sheet. This is kind of the meat and potatoes of the process in and of itself. As you can see, modified those hazards to look at those climate hazards. But one of the other things I thought needed to be done was in the kind of middle left section there, where it says data centers, that used to say secure information. Basically, when you're talking about classified information, things like that, that was that particular thing. Obviously, when you're looking at climate, you're not necessarily going to be worried now about classified information and protecting it, but you would probably put more interest and more weight to your data centers, because data drives so much, and there's already risks with overheating, potential flooding in some of those regions where they're at. So that would become its own kind of call out in its own higher risk level, again, because of what those data centers are. And if you remember that process as it exists for anti-terrorism, that was just one specific block that just either was very low or very high. It just was very, very crystal clear. But the process in and of itself as it exists would remain the same. You would work your way through the different tables. You would determine what your value rating factors are. And then that initial, as I used to call it, kind of swag that you would do in that first category there on the left, you would still, the intent would be to arrive at either you apply minimum standards, which those minimum standards for climate hardening would have to be determined, or you would proceed now to the next level, just as you did in the anti-terrorism version, to work your way more through those hazards and just ask yourself more questions. Hey, in this initial section, you said that you valued these assets as very, very high. Let's go through this now and see how much this really means to you based on these different hazards. And then you would arrive down there at the bottom right, ultimately with a number, just like you do now, that would say either, again, apply minimum standards. Those would, again, need to be determined, or move on and kind of work your way through determining what that level of protection is above baseline. This was, again, a mock-up of looking at how those tables could be modified and adapted to work for this process. So for example, the installation location. Now you're not necessarily looking at, are you inside a city? Are you outside of a city? Are you more kind of in the country, stuff like that? You're looking at how far away are you from known climate hazards, for example? Are you near a river that floods on a fairly regular basis? Are you in a floodplain? Are you in an area that's been prone to wildfires, for example? And then there would be a weight to that. Do you have 2 to 4 climate hazards that you've known in that area? Again, it would get a higher weight. And as it shows, located in an area with 4 or more climate hazards, or at least 2 major hazards, gets a greater weight, again, just as it did in the anti-terrorism side. Current features, is there any climate hardening? Is there a little bit, or is there a lot of climate hardening? And the way that table used to work is it's obviously reverse. If there's none, obviously there's a higher rating. If there's a lot of climate hardening, for example, then you get a lower because you obviously wouldn't have to do a lot. Another couple of examples of a couple of different tables where the facility is located in proximity to climate hazards, or for example, similar assets being located either on the installation, away from the installation, things like that. So if you think of a data center, if that is the only data center that processes that data in that area, obviously your value to that is going to be very, very high. Your risk to that could either be high or low, but you're going to want to protect that more than if you have a couple of data centers spread out across the area that kind of can share the load. If one goes down, the other one can pick it up, for example. And then again, a couple more tables, emergency services being a priority here. Local data center, as you can see, with redundancy, without redundancy, whether it's strategic or local or regional. And then history of acts. I broke this into 2 categories using, again, what was already existing. So everything with the exception of fire or flood has its own category. There's no history of the hazard. There's little to no. There's some, and then there's a history where it's happened in the last couple of years. And then fire or flood kind of gets its own, because fire or flood seems to be something that is fairly more common these days than your hurricanes, tornadoes, things like that. So again, just kind of looking at, and I think you can see how that process could be very, very easily adapted and provide the field with a tool to be able to look at what those climate hazards are, what those severe weather hazards are, what the risk is, and then ultimately determine that level of protection so that designers, if the manual is built behind it to say what are those standards, the designers now can say, okay, hey, we're baseline, and this is what baseline actually means. You know, maybe there's a flood wall, maybe there's hurricane windows, you know, concrete buildings versus wood to lower your fire risk, things like that. Or you would now be able to justify going above baseline. And I think that's very important because in the AT documents, whenever you needed to go above what that baseline is, you need a solid justification. And this process, at least on the AT side, and I think on the climate side, could provide you with that justification to go above baseline. Because you've done that work, you've done that kind of risk analysis, and you've said, hey, look, we're in an area that's prone to fire, we're in an area that's prone to flooding. It's already happened. And we need to basically, when we reconstruct or build this building, make it much more robust than what that baseline is for those particular hazards. And again, none of this exists right now officially. This is just something that we came up with. This is why this is mock-ups. As those of you who have worked with this process know, there's a lot of work that was done, you know, over the years behind the scenes to build those tables, to gather that data, to create those mathematical models that when you go through this process, you arrive at numbers that make sense. And it adds up to direct you to either, again, that low level of protection or to proceed further, to do further analysis. That would all need to be created. But again, I do firmly believe that the bones of it exist already in 41001 and 42001. It wouldn't take much to kind of reskin that for climate. And I think it would be a good tool going forward in the future. So Nick, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, you can see, thank you, Chris. You can see there that here's what we talked about today. So we'd be happy to take any questions.
Chris and Mick, thank you very much. I must admit, when you started the presentation, I wondered where you were going with it, but I think your understanding is basically adapting the risk assessment approach for ATFP to being a risk assessment approach for climate. Fascinating. So, do we have any questions here in the room?
Question. So I understand the concept and it's a great concept. I understand how it can be applied, but where are we in the process moving forward in concert with USAID and DoD to establish the minimum standards and what requirements moving forward?
So again, right now, this is really the first time that we're showing this. The point I think of showing this now is to kind of start to get it out into the field to see what others think about it, because obviously the Corps would need money to do this. 42001, for those of you that know, hasn't been updated since 2008. Part of the reason why is the lack of funding to update that document. You can imagine the amount of funding it would take in the undertaking for the Corps to either hire whatever contract firm they would need to do that kind of background analysis, to pull all that data of what fed the AT side, to convert that now to the climate side. So to directly answer your question, have not had those conversations yet with the Corps about doing that. But if I think the audience starts to feel that that's something that's necessary, that this is something that could be beneficial, we can start probably having that conversation at those levels to look at what it would take. And I think with the examples of with Tyndall, with what the fact that what's the base that I keep referring to in Tampa? MacDill Air Force Base literally has been under threat now for I think the last 3 or 4 plus years, almost directly from a direct hurricane. I think that there would be some significant appetite for something like this going forward, because it's not getting any better.
And whether it's high wind or it's fire, lightning, tornadoes, principle applies.
I think this is
really a good concept, and you're thinking out of the box and, put the stuff together, taking Carver and saying, let's apply this to. At some point in the process, especially with DOT, cost is somebody's gonna say, hey, how much does this cost? Have you guys kind of looked at this at all, or is that too early?
No, it needs to be looked at, but no, we haven't. We looked at just being able to present the concept of the idea first. But yeah, that's one of the components that would have to come next. I like the fact you mentioned Carver. You're the first person I've ever heard say that.
I was with the Corps of Engineers.
I can tell you know as you talk.
No, I wish I did. I was in design a long time ago, and I was lousy, so my boss sold me to user and sent me to those guys, and I used to go all around Europe doing this stuff. And so, yes, I think it's of course, when 2000, after 9/11, that was upgraded and sophisticated and complex and everything. But basically, you're taking the skeleton and saying, hey, let's apply it here.
Yes.
And I think that's a great idea. I really do. And of course, there are other climate hazards too. For example, like the one that would be hard for us to get our arms around would be like in the state of Washington, Kitsap.
Mm-hmm.
If the fault ever went, that would be the end of the Army, Navy, and the Air Force. In the Navy, we have our nuclear subs there. But how do you quantifying that is really tough, and throwing money at that is tough. So I guess that would be an outlier.
Yeah, the important thing is what you're bringing up is the importance of incorporating a phrase that I've used in my work, and we brought into natural hazards that covers things beyond severe weather and climate related things like earthquakes, like volcanoes, like tsunamis. None of, fortunately, none of which apply here in this geographic area, but they certainly do elsewhere around the world.
Pacific.
Yes,
Absolutely.
and the work that we did for the Department of State incorporated that broad spectrum of natural hazards, including those three that I just described.
And I think this goes back to the point of further study and identifying probability versus the effects associated with in regards to driving minimum standards and so forth.
Yeah, but and it's what you're seeing in terms of the let's use severity in terms of the monetary amounts of damage in the billions of dollars.
Correct.
The number of more than $1 billion events have increased. The cost is now far greater just based on today's damaging events than it's ever been in the past. And so the cost calculations need to be adjusted. The standards that Chris talked about and what is the baseline, what is good enough is no longer not good enough. It's not good enough.
I'm sure one of the things you looked at that was really important, at least before, was recovery. Base commanders, post commanders, if something bad happens that shuts everything down, their first question is, when am I back online?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And have you looked at that, or
in other work? We didn't look at it in terms of here, but it's like the question that's begged by this. When I do, in fact, I've done them here, where I've talked about the continuity requirements that base commanders have to get to what does it cost me to get to return to X amount of service or mission delivery when I have a disruption, when there's a destructive event that occurs. How much does it cost? How much time does it take? what type of personnel or resources does it take? And, when are you going to get me there?
Yeah, one thing you mentioned that's really, I think is important is supply chains.
Mhm.
Because if the event hits, that goes down. And that is sometimes is the rate limiting step.
It's another reason why you have to look beyond the fence line, because,
Yeah.
there's the system that exists to supply, whether it's construction materials or it's just ordinary maintenance materials or equipment replacements, is far more sophisticated than it's ever been, meaning complex, the word that you use.
Yeah.
More complex than they've ever been in the past. And unless organizations take a look at those supply chains in terms of the severe weather hazards that they face, the natural hazards that they face, then they're missing a big piece of it, because that's going to help answer that commander's question about how long is it going to take and what's it going to take and how much it's going to cost to get me back to this degree of mission delivery. Could I want to add?
Just great discussion going on in here in the room. I'd just like to give folk online opportunity to ask questions. We have any questions online? Okay, Scott, there you go. Thought you might be interested in this one.
For sure. Yeah, so interesting and good concept. I've been looking forward to learn more on this project you two have been working on. So thanks for putting the time together to share it with our group today. Since this is, more kind of your first presentation of the concept to the public, maybe I have also maybe not specific questions, but more thoughts. And if you have information on it already, please share. If not, maybe it's just some thoughts as the process goes forward. So a key difference I see between the AT standards and these climate hazards is that the AT standards that were referenced, I mean, they were kind of the only standards that existed for protection from those hazards. I mean, there was nothing, so the DoD created them. But with natural hazards, there's already a long history of design criteria from ASCE for wind, for earthquakes, and other sources for flooding. So I'm curious how this process, when it arrives at what is the right level of protection for it, how that's going to then incorporate those different many codes that exist for those hazards. And then on that same thought, I found it was very good, Mick, how you transitioned it. Your talking piece where you said, you showed the video and saying that, of that whole community that was wiped out, these few houses, survived because they were designed well above what that specified criteria or baseline was. So that's where I already see the value in this process you're proposing, is that it's like Major Hypercamp said, it gives that justification to exceed baseline. So that's where I can see some value for it. And another aspect I see value is in the current standards. They do incorporate kind of what is that building's importance. A hospital is going to be designed for a much higher earthquake event or wind event than maybe a residential building. So they already kind of incorporate asset value. But I think where this process, as you're proposing, could add value is kind of asset value relative to an entire portfolio. So if there's just this one data center that serves this one mission capability, then it's of course it has a higher asset value, different than what an ASCE specification might say. So those are some thoughts that came to mind. If you have anything in return, great, or if not, maybe just something to help shape it going forward. Over.
No, I mean, though, definitely, good insight. And you and I have talked before we kind of went our separate ways recently about some of those existing standards and documents already that exist. But I think in a lot of ways, again, at that unit level, as you're going forward, when you're looking at renovating a building or doing that new construction, there's the design criteria that kind of already exists, but there's no way to say, hey, I think we do need to go above what this says, but I have no way of kind of proving that or a process to identify that and justify it. And I think that's what this would ultimately do. Because we do know in a lot of cases that some of those standards are a little outdated, or again, the storms are getting higher, worse. And how do you kind of pull that forward to say, yeah, I get that this is what this document says, but I need to go much higher than that, and here's how I justify that.
I'd append to what Chris just said, Scott, that what you touched on in your last comment about the hospital and so forth, in the military sense, goes to mission criticality, and which assets are most critical to the accomplishment of the mission. And consequently, if those assets are disrupted or destroyed, then what effect does that have on the mission? And that lays out what we believe the context of this is about, that being able to go from identifying mission criticality to identifying mission critical assets to identifying what needs to be done to prepare for in the event that they are damaged, disrupted, or destroyed, which is at the essence of these two UFCs, and ultimately getting to design of any new replacements or new construction elsewhere. But also being able to, again, answer the commander's question: what's it going to cost me? How long is it going to take? And who's going to do it? That's what mission criticality gets you to.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any more questions, comments, input from the online audience? Okay, you're in the room?
Just,
Go ahead,
are
Pat.
you gonna have a part two of this sometime in the
We
future?
hope to.
Yeah.
Good.
Some of the comments that we've gotten right here at this table have been very encouraging, and hopefully we'll be able to find a way to do that. Chris has to get back to work first.
Yeah, I think it fixed.
So just maybe just one comment. Just align my background from the environmental side, with some experience of doing facility design. So, when we're looking at replacing windows, which I'm thinking building renovations, right, rather than new construction. So a lot of the work we're seeing here in Germany on the existing concerns is renovation. I see, lots of arguments coming in why not to replace the windows, right? Replacing windows is an expensive part of renovation, so let's close the parking, let's move the standoff. Obviously, when you're talking about tornadoes and hurricanes, your standoff distance goes out the window. That's sort of the phrase. So I think that's, and many of these things are, location or regionally driven. So regionally driven in terms of high winds, fire, and then some in terms of, more specific site location in terms of flooding. And certainly in Europe, a lot of the focus on climate resilience is in terms of the severe storm events. So where it's not necessarily an actual building that is threatened, it's actually, or the building is threatened, but the solution is not related to a particular building, particularly it's related to the site drainage, the retention basins, so maybe increasing tree cover or permeable surfaces, things like that. So that would then be looking at a slightly different level, installation level, rather than a building by building level. So I guess that moves more into the planning side rather than the actual facility design side.
That's part of what you mentioned is leads to what are known as nature-based solutions. What part of the natural environment can be enhanced at a lower cost than an engineered solution in that isn't part of the environment, that's built on it, dug down into it, those kinds of things. Working on a project for the Navy now in that vein, and it's something that needs to be looked at. It's another factor to bring in. It's those kinds of things are what have to be looked at when we deal with the cost components and what can be done to enhance the natural environment, and that brings a benefit to the built environment.
Okay.
And Brian, just to get to your point, while the process is facility focused, if it's crafted right, it could take into account things like perhaps there's a plan to put in a retention basin, which would reduce that risk to flooding, or specific drainage and things like that. So if the process is kind of crafted right, I think it would be able to also either incorporate that or lead, designers to that, like, hey, perhaps we can't do anything about the building. However, in order to increase that level of protection, we have to put in a retention pond somewhere further up the way or whatever else. So it could steer, just as in the AT side kind of sometimes steers the larger picture of the site. This could do the same thing.
In the nature-based solution world, being able to capitalize on, say, a soccer field, that's grass on dirt, as an area where stormwater could be vectored prior to discharge off-site, for it to settle down and permeate through and be filtered in that manner without disrupting somebody else's important game, but one that would help, and ultimately what will help the mission. That's really what it has to be about, is what's going to be a force multiplier for the mission.
Excellent. Right, I think we're all done here in the room. It looks like we don't have any more questions online, so it just leaves to me to, first of all, to thank both of you for coming in, for making the trip, for being patient with us getting into the building, for finding this new venue. So thank you very much for.
Thank you for the great technical advisors we have over here across
The unsung heroes, Sandy and Jessica. Thank you both very much for taking care of us. Thanks to you, serves anyone who wrote down there personally, but Mike. Thank you very much. Great job. Chris.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Okay, then thank you very much, everybody. That draws our meeting to a close. Thanks for joining us. Watch out for information on our January our big presentation with the Corps of Engineers presenting their program, and there'll be information coming out on that shortly. Next week. Give us maybe 2 weeks, and we should have all that squared away for you. Okay, thanks a lot, and have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.